Sorry? The pilot for this flight. This is my very first flight. I haven't even actually officially gotten my license yet, so let us pray for one another.
You hit this button once to it's muted right now.
Okay.
So just push it once, it'll turn green. You're ready.
Okay. So let me know when you're ready for my check. Give me a,
We'll give you a wave from back there.
okay, you. Okay. Napkin.
All right, you want to try?
So I need to press this button once. Turn screen. Okay. Check. Mic check one.
Yep, that's it.
Thank you.
Did you see that? Yes.
See what?
The orange juice too.
Yes. Thank you.
We're gonna have you do it one more time just so we can hear.
Okay.
Can hear.
You want to right from here?
Yeah, just do it one more time. Just do the touch. But yes,
Mic check. Check one. Check 1, 2. There you go.
Sorry, excuse me. As soon as you finish your first, go back and get seconds because they're not going to stay hot. So try another one. It's different for the first, but please, there's plenty for everybody to keep eating.
We're gonna get started in about 5 minutes, just to give you a quick heads up.
That's
Oh, that's because I haven't.
no, that's
Oh, yeah,
fine.
that-
No, I think that's over here.
That recorded. It's on my screen.
It's not on mine, so it might be on yours.
Oh, it's on mine. There we go. It's on
Got it? There you go. Perfect.
and we're good.
Okay, that sounds, I can understand. Yeah. Before breakfast, I mean, before dinner. Okay, then, that's a lot of bread. They just needed those calories. Right. Text them on their cell phone. Is that a way for them to have cell phone? Exactly.
How are you?
Good. Kushner here. It's been just kind of like her son. So he's going to be right in the middle.
Okay.
Trying to quietly down.
No worries, but thank you for letting me know.
Okay, well, yeah, that's another big one. Sorry, I'm
I guess I should turn on the mic before I say it.
that's a great woman.
Hello, everyone. Can I have your attention, please?
Hello? Hello, all.
Hi, thank you. My name is Seth. I'm a member of the Social Justice Committee. Just wanted to thank everyone for coming out. Really pleased with the turnout. I also want to thank Fred for being so gracious to accept our invitation to come down and speak. Thank you for the wonderful sermon. And with that, I'll hand things on over to Fred.
Just before we get started, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Seth, who reached out to me. Thank you to Reverend Kathy, who connected us. Thank you to the Social Justice Committee for inviting me to speak today. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, since I am a Black man living in New Hampshire. I'm here at 8 and 10, folks. I'm going to sit down for most of this. I've got some slides I want to go through, but to be honest, we plan to take about an hour. I want to spend no more than about 30, 35 minutes of that talking because I already know what's happening in my head. What I really want to do is understand what's happening in your head. What are the questions that come up for you? What are the challenges that you experience? And we can practice engaging those things and talking about them. I titled this talk "Uncomfortable Conversations with the New Hampshire Black Man," in part to localize a series of conversations that Emmanuel Ache did. Some of you may remember that during the pandemic, he actually brought in a number of folks, including police officers, other athletes, politicians, all kinds of folks, to sit down and have a conversation and say, okay, how do we, in the wake of the death of George Floyd, how do we come together and begin to talk about what it means to be community and what it means to experience community from different points of view? Okay, so that's really what this talk is about. I wanted to begin. Let's see. Okay, there we go. It's working now. Really wanted to begin. We're going to talk a little bit about my background, some of my frameworks, because I think it's, at least for me, it's helpful if I have a framework with which to hang some of these ideas on, so that when I if I need to get back to them, I can use the framework to get back to the specific ideas. I want to talk a little bit about my experiences, and then if we have time, I have some uncomfortable questions that I have received as a Black person living in these United States, and I'll share some of those with you. And then I want to hear your questions, your conversation. If we have time, I have some parting thoughts and some other resources that might be available. Let's jump into the conversation. First of all, why are we having this conversation? Thanks to Emmanuel Acho, who inspired the talk for this series. As we've mentioned, I've got a framework that has 4 elements in it. We'll go through each of those. One of the things I want to make sure that we touch on is what is it that we miss in our discussions about American history and race? Because there's this feeling that difficult conversations about race are a current issue of the moment. And the reality is that they have a historical basis. So we're going to talk about that. We'll also touch on what works and what needs work. I'm going to be talking about this because I really want to share skills so we can build bridges. And we want to build those bridges through understanding and conversation and dialogue. Why is that important? The reality is I'm going to tell you some stories about my life, and I'm going to tell you some things that I've experienced. And I'm doing that because I have found in this polarized environment, it's easier for us to walk toward each other's stories than it is to walk toward each other's positions. Okay. And so that is an important distinction when you begin to engage people in the work that you as CGF do, that in addition to understanding what people's positions are, you want to understand their stories, because we can't argue about our story. We can argue about our position, but we can't argue about people's felt experience of being who they are in this time and in this space. And so that's, part of what I'm up to. And if I'm talking too fast, please tell me to slow down. So let's talk about frameworks. For me first, and I know you probably can't read that, but I'll make these slides available for folks. But the first framework is race. And what do I mean by that? And why is it an element in my framework? The concept of race is made up. Okay. If you look at genetics, what you will find is if you gather a bunch of Italians together, there will be more variability in that 100% Italian gene pool than there will be between that gene pool and me. Okay. So how did we get here? It's a concept that was made up in order to facilitate an economic, social, and political agenda, which we call chattel slavery. Okay. Europeans didn't encounter each other and say, what race are you? They said, what's your ethnicity? Are you Italian? Are you Anglo-Saxon? Are you German? That's how they encountered each other. People started writing about race and writing a bunch of things about race when they needed to justify and maintain an economic system in which some people were used for the benefit of others. So that's one piece. We'll talk also about identity politics, but I want to say quickly, especially for people of color, for women, for those of the LGBTQ community, you'll hear a lot of talk now about identity politics. We didn't invent identity politics. Identity politics were invented in the 1630s. When the first law was passed in 1638 that said I could not marry my white wife, that white women were not allowed to marry black slaves. Okay, so when people start talking to you about identity politics, trying to make you feel badly for speaking up about who you are and how you move through life, we didn't make that up. It's not original to us. It's not something that the liberals did as part of this woke revolution. Identity politics started when we started writing laws about who could be who and who was okay. And that goes all the way back to the 1600s. The next element is relationship. And the reason I want to talk about that is it is crucial for all of us, white people, black people, people of color, to understand that as long as we cohabit a space, we are in relationship. And all of you who've been in a significant romantic relationship, well, I was going to say understand, but that's not true. All of you have had the experience, and hopefully some of us have grown enough to have the understanding that relationships don't heal until people feel heard, acknowledged, and empowered to exercise their own agency. Okay. Other than that, in a relationship, what you get is silence, but the fight is not over. Okay. You go to bed angry. You get up, you don't talk to each other the next day, or you don't talk to your sister for 6 months. You know, because we haven't been heard, we haven't been seen, we haven't been acknowledged, and we haven't had the chance to exercise our own agency. One of the things that's important about relationships, because one of the questions I get is why do Black people hate America? Is being in relationship means that when you have a disagreement, it doesn't mean you hate your partner. It simply means you disagree. Okay, but there is a climate that we're in that suggests that disagreement equals disloyalty equals hate. Okay, and so part of the reason I'm telling you this is we want to be able to see that in conversational cycle and then interrupt. We want to back ourselves up so we don't fall into the trap of having an argument about whether or not we love America or we're loyal to America. That's a stupid argument. It simply is. But it's an easier argument to have if I don't actually want to listen to you. So part of what I want you to take from this is to begin to recognize the conversational gambits that are going on. Okay, so that we know how to interrupt them as people of Christ and then step into those arguments, those moments with love, patience, understanding, and curiosity. Say, oh, okay, that's an interesting viewpoint. What makes you think that Black people don't love America? Is it the fact that we built the economic base of the country? We have people who fought and died in various wars for the country, including the Revolutionary War. That means we hate this place? Oh, okay. Tell me how you got there. Okay. That's a question of curiosity that then invites more exploration of the position as opposed to arguing about the position. Okay. We're also going to talk a little bit about reconciliation. It's a word that in the Latin sense means to bring together again. I like what Dr. Gina Minix, who's a theologian, said that what can we hope for in communities where the story of togetherness begins with the oppression of one group by another? Okay. To reconcile is to bring people back together. That conversation assumes that at some point they were equals in that relationship. Okay. But what if that is not the case? Okay, then we need to have a different conversation. And last of all, I want us to think about history. We joined the movie already in progress. You know, if we don't understand where we are, we will not be able to accurately measure our progress because we don't understand where we were. Okay. And if we don't understand where we were, and if we only pretend to understand how we fail, we're never going to be able to understand how we succeed. Okay. The challenge for that is people who don't want to talk about various kinds of history, because then we want to pretend that we understand, okay, as opposed to taking an honest look at things. So I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm going to spend like 2 minutes on this because there's some other stuff that I want to get to. I am not the person that you would expect to be sitting in front of me today. If you looked at the demographics, my father dropped out of school when he was in 7th grade during the Depression to help support his family. He never got an education. He was a gangbanger. He was an alcoholic. He was a coke addict. My mother and her family came from Charleston, South Carolina, off of a farm. My last name is Chisolm because that's the name of the people who owned us. Okay. My name goes all the way back to a plantation on James Island, South Carolina. Okay. But my grandfather left the South in the 20s, moved to New York just in time for the Depression. Uh, um, but it was a way for him to get out of the Jim Crow South. And he built a life. He built eventually a hardware store. He valued education, even though in South Carolina he was not educated, because back in the early 1900s, they saw no reason to fully educate Black people. So my grandfather wrote phonetically for almost all of his entire life, which was 78 years. But your circumstances don't determine your drive. Your circumstances don't determine your outcome. It's what you do in the midst of those circumstances. It's what you do with the challenges that are placed in front of you that will determine your outcome. Okay. Now, do circumstances make the hill steeper? They can, absolutely. I'm not gonna lie about that. But what I learned from my grandfather is that you have to fix your eyes on what you want and then not be distracted by human things. Okay. We talked about that this morning. You got to focus on what it is you're trying to achieve. And for some of you who are doing social justice work, for some of you who are doing racial reconciliation work, there are lots of distractions for you. People are going to feed you things to try to make you feel better about not doing anything. Okay. Why don't we have another conference? Why don't we all meet and talk about it? Let's not help anybody yet because we don't know exactly how we want to help people. Well, let's help them get a job. Let's not have a meeting about how to help people find a place to live. Let's work on helping people find a place to live. How about we meet about that? You know, and the distractions can be really subtle. So why am I here? I'm here because my grandfather valued education. That value was passed down to my mother. And so I sit in front of you as a man with an engineering degree from Yale, an MBA from the University of Chicago, flight test credentials from the Naval Air Warfare Center, and now a priest. When you pass the Black men on the street, you're not thinking about me. Many of you didn't even know I existed until I walked in here, in terms of what my story was. And so the truth of it is, you don't know that about anybody you pass on the street. Okay. What we do is we make up the story in our head because that's what our head does. It is processing the environment and telling us things about it because, we have to make some decisions. What I want to do is to make us aware of that. What I want us to do is learn about how our own process works so that we can step into these situations fully aware of who we are in these moments. Okay, because you can't change who someone else is in these moments. You can only be aware of who you are and then take care. And you can only be aware of who you are and then bring that to the moment and try to bring healing and justice and God's love and hope. But if you're not sure who you are in that moment, that's going to be really difficult. I was a hospital chaplain, and for a while, one of the things they teach you is to learn how you are experiencing what's happening in the room, so that you can be sure whether you're processing the other person's experience or whether you're processing your experience, and just using the other person to do that. So this is part of what we want to learn. This was a much longer presentation. I wanted to cut it down so we could have some time to chat. I wanted to update these slides because I did this presentation after the murder of George Floyd. I wanted to change the slides. The problem is I couldn't update the presentation because we didn't update the country. Okay. George Floyd, 2000. February 9th, 2024, Louisiana prosecutors dismissed charges against white troopers who bragged about beating a black motorist. They didn't just brag about it, it was recorded. And then they shared it on their social media networks. They shared pictures of dragging this man down the street by his dreadlocks. And the Attorney General said, hey, I don't think this might have been, uncivil, but I don't think there was anything criminal about what happened here. So I couldn't update the slides. We look at the murder of Tyler Nichols. This happened a few years ago. This news story, end of January, newly released recordings reveal what officers said after Nichols' fatal beating. Much of the comments suggest the officers and paramedics appeared fixated on the idea that he was high on drugs, which means that the cops did not tell the paramedics that they had just beat the shit out of this man. They propped him up against the car where he slouched unresponsive. And one of the emergency medical technicians claimed, well, he's not injured, he's just high. That would suggest that the police never said that, we just had a pound party on this guy. So I couldn't update the slides. My experience in moving to New Hampshire. When we moved here, we moved into Littleton, a lovely city, a lovely town. I love Littleton. We had a great time there. I moved there to manage the fourth largest employer in town. I would walk down the street the first couple of years, walking down Main Street. Some guys would drive by me. Every time they saw me, they said, Negro, go home. Negro is not the word that they use, but I use it here because I don't want to practice using the other one. And I don't want you to practice it either. What happened was over time, one of my coworkers got sick. He had a heart attack. I went to visit him at Dartmouth Hitchcock several times. And when he came back to work, he wanted to know if there was something he could do for me because no plant manager had ever actually visited people in the hospital. And I said, yeah, here you're a shooter. Would you give me shooting lessons? He said, sure. Now, this man was a stone cold survivalist. He's a man, bald head, beard, cut off overalls, high top socks, black boots. Never went anywhere after work with it without at least 2 weapons on him at all times. Kept a go bag in the back of his car, would sit in the parking lot sometimes at lunch, practicing making fire without matches. But because I took lessons with this man and because I went to different places with him, he co-signed me into the community, into people who might not otherwise even have talked to me if I hadn't come in with him. The people with the tattoos that are barely visible above their shirt collars. He brought me in, so I must be okay. And it didn't mean that they liked me. It just meant they weren't going to screw with me. Either that or they thought, well, if he's taking lessons with this guy, one of 2 things could happen. If we mess with him, he could shoot back. Or if we mess with him, so-and-so could come looking for us. Neither of those were good outcomes. So then my passage was smooth. This is something you don't have to do if you're white. You don't have to get co-signed into white communities. You don't need to do that. You just show up. And you're okay until you mess up. One of the things we experience in the North Country, a little bit, I don't know that we had this experience in Chicago, but we've had it here in New Hampshire. And that is where I go into a restaurant with my wife, who's sitting there, and has put up with all this nonsense, so thank you, dear. And we go into a restaurant, and I'm standing 5 feet away from her. And the hostess looks at both of us and says, dinner for one? And we're the only people standing in front of the hostess desk. It's not like it's crowded. It's not like there's a rush on. Literally, we were the only people standing at the hostess desk. So part of my experience is to be seen and not seen. Okay? To be visible and invisible at the same time. We moved down to West Bled. We lived in an apartment building. It has a garage underneath. Now, I told you in my sermon, I'm an engineer. I love architecture. I also study and teach various kinds of dance. I'm big on pattern recognition. And notice that the doors and windows in the garage were not symmetrical. They were not evenly spaced, and they were not aligned in a way that made sense to me, at least. So I was walking through the garage one day, just kind of clocking this. And I think it's the next day, we get an email. No, it was that afternoon. We get an email that there is a black man in the garage looking in cars. Now, I get the if you see something, say something stuff. I absolutely understand that. I worked as an auxiliary police officer in college. We told people to do those things. So I get it. But that's part of my reality, is that I'm the thing that doesn't fit. So how does that work out for me? We're living in West Lev. I go to the Home Depot. It is during the 2020 elections cycle, the run-up. People are walking around in their stars and bars boots and flying their flags and carrying their guns in open carry. I go into the Home Depot in the garden aisle, right near the garden aisle. I go to get something. Here comes another man, a white man, with an Armed Patriot t-shirt on and his gun on a high carry on his right hip. And he sees me coming, and so he cranks his cart sideways so that I can't get by him, and then just stares at me. And so I'm from New York City, okay? So one of the things you learn in New York growing up, unless you want to be a punk all your life, is you don't run from bullies. So I looked him dead in the eye. And then I smiled at him, and I reached over and picked up the broom that was right next to where I was standing. I smiled at him again, turned around, and went out the other end. But that, for many of you, is not part of your existence. What it breeds for me is this sense of hypervigilance that I must always be aware when I'm moving through white space. Okay? And that my job is to make white people comfortable with me when I'm in their space, because that is how I'm going to stay safe. I'm trading stress for safety. Okay. Now, some of you might know that. You know, I know some women who think about moving through parking lots late at night by themselves. Might feel that way. There are other places where they feel vulnerable. So this experience isn't unique to me. What is different is that it's something I carry with me 24 hours a day. When I get stopped by the police, what I do, even before they get to the car, is I put my wallet and my keys on the dashboard, and I put my hands through the steering wheel. Oh, back up. If it's dark, I turn on the interior lights, and then I put my hands on the steering wheel. Now, people say the incidence of unarmed black motorists being beaten or killed is not unusual. I'm okay with that. Show me the videotape of a white unarmed motorist being killed. Where's the body cam footage? I'm an engineer. If that's your story, I'm good with it. Bring me the data. Show me that this is an experience that is more likely to happen to me as a black man. Things you don't have to think about, or many of you don't have to think about as you move through this world, as you move through white space. Now, I don't say that to be a downer. I don't say that to try to shame anyone. I don't want you to feel ashamed. I want you to be aware, and then I want you to engage the feelings that you are having, so that you remember that other people are having different experiences of this moment. And that just because we're all at the same place and we witness the same event, it doesn't mean we're having the same experience. So ask me about mine, and I can ask you about yours. And then we can build a bridge where we don't have to hate each other. We don't have to yell at each other, and we don't have to rehearse our positions. What that cross in the sanctuary means is that we cannot build the community that we need to build if we simply rehearse our positions. We cannot bring love. We cannot bring community. We cannot bring the unity of God's people if we simply rehearse our positions. And somebody died for that, to help us try to figure out how to do that better. Just a quick couple of things, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. I put these dates up here. We talked a little bit about the idea of when racism began in this country, or when systemic racism began. The first enslaved people arrived in 1619. In 1638, I think it started in the state of Delaware, it became illegal for me to marry my wife. It wasn't legal in all 50 states until 1967. It took us 439 years to figure that out. So 29 years to figure that out. Okay. Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights by their creator, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The original text said the pursuit of property. But because there were men of goodwill in the room, because there weren't any women in the room at that point, they wrestled with this thing and said, okay, we can do better than property. We can do better than that. How about liberty? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How about those things? Okay. And they said yes, knowing that it wasn't true when they wrote it down. But they wrote it down aspirationally. And so when you encounter these people who tell you, well, don't you believe in the Constitution? Don't you? But ask them when was the last time they read it. I believe in it so much I'm willing to argue with you about it. I believe in it so much that I'm willing to push to turn that aspiration into inspiration, into reality. That's how much I believe in. Are you down with that? 1787. Why is that up there? 3/5 compromise. That is the year, in order to compromise on getting the Constitution written, that they decided that every slave would be counted as 3/5 of a person. Now, why did they do that? They did that because seats in the House of Representatives are apportioned based on local population. So if they counted all the slaves, the southern states, the states that have large slave populations, would have an unbalanced majority in the House of Representatives. The northern states didn't want that. But the northern states said, hey, we don't want to count slaves at all. They're not citizens. Why do you want to count them? And the southern slaves said, look, they're people, at least for today. And we want to count them. And so they came up with this compromise. And then we went to war about the question in 1860. And we had Reconstruction. And then people were really unhappy with that. There was a compromise over the election. Reconstruction was disabled, was rolled back, and we got Jim Crow for the next 70 years. 1896, after Jim Crow was being enacted, the reason that date is up there, that's Plessy versus Ferguson. That is the date when the Supreme Court said separate but equal accommodations are okay. You don't have to treat Black people like citizens as long as they have someplace to go. 1954, Brown versus Board of Ed, that said actually separate but equal is separate but not equal. We can do better. We have this aspiration. Our Constitution says, in order to form a more perfect union, which means that even the people who wrote it knew they weren't there yet. So they wrote an aspirational statement. There is no ceiling to more. There is no ceiling to more perfect union. And that is the work that we have to do in terms of racial reconciliation, in terms of reconciliation of all the marginalized communities that we live in and around. And that's why we're here. Just a couple of quick questions, and then I'm going to stop so we can get a couple of quick things, and then I'm going to stop and take your questions. Some of the stuff that I want to acknowledge is there are some who say, when are you people going to stop talking about this racism stuff? When are you going to let it go? And my response is when it stops. You know, if you have a leak in your roof, how long are you going to let that go? But that seems hard for some people because they feel guilty. We don't want you to feel guilty. We want you to feel aware. We want you to be informed so that you can make decisions that reflect both your emotions and your understanding. So I want to make sure that we acknowledge that some things have changed. We had the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and 65. Travel. I used to go to South Carolina in the summers to work on the farm that my grandfather grew up on. When we got on the train in New York, we had to carry everything we were going to eat when we got on the train, because once we got south of DC, there was no guarantee in a Jim Crow state that we were going to be served if we got off the train for food. That has changed. I have educational opportunities. Lots of people of color and women have educational opportunities that they did not have 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I can marry my wife. We've seen some things change in terms of overt government-supported racism. But there's still stuff that needs work. I applaud the Georgia governor who stood up during the 2020 elections and said, look, we did things by the book. But what you don't know about him is that after he started running for governor, in one day, Georgia removed over 500,000 people from the voting rolls in a single day, 600,000 in a year. And I'm not upset with them because they have the right to manage their list. I'm upset with them because of the way the deal went down. Those people who were removed who wanted to vote had to file provisional ballots. There were 70,000 that weren't counted. He won by 5,000 votes. So we're not done yet. The recent uptake or deal with the Alabama electoral map for the House of Representatives. Their court told them they had to revise it. They said no. The appeals court told them they had to revise it. They said no. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, look, this map is clearly gerrymandered so that with all the black people in the state of Alabama, there's one black majority voting district. One in the entire state. So SCOTUS, following the law or having an attack of conscience, I don't care which, said to Alabama, you have to revise this map. And so they did. And so they're happy now because 30% of their population is black. They got 2 black voters. We did what we were supposed to do. We talked about systems. We said that systems produce the outcomes they are designed to produce. And if the system works well, it does that consistently. And that's what this system does in Alabama. We got education. We still have good schools. We still have redlining. We don't do it anymore, but the effects of it are easy to see. If you get a look at a map, the redlining map, and for those of you who don't know what redlining was, it was a line around neighborhoods that banks drew and said they will not lend in those areas. If you look at that map from 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and you look at where poverty and poor folks and crime are in Manchester today, it will surprise you how much it matches that map. Because when you starve a neighborhood of economic resources, then wonder why they can't flourish. It seems a little dishonest. And that's why history is important. Oh, we're just going to start fresh today. We'll just, how about we all start on a level playing field today? Well, that's okay, unless you're in Vegas and they've taken 75% of your money and you realize they're cheating you, and then they say, let's play fair. You're like, can I have my money back? They say, no, we're going to play fair from here on out. Isn't that good enough? Well, how about if I do that with your life? How about if I do that with your children's future? So these are the things that, that we're trying to work through. These are the things that we need to be aware of, so that when we encounter the world, we encounter it with an understanding of how things got to be the way that they are, so that we know what we need to do next in order to make them better. I'm not looking for shame. I'm not looking for folks to hang their head and say, oh my God, we're so terribly sorry. You can pick that up if you want to. I'm not asking you to pick that up. What I am asking you to pick up is awareness of what happened, what is happening, and what is happening inside of you. Because those are the 3 things that you bring when you meet the moment. And the more conscious we are about them, the more helpful we can be. Now, the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to take questions this is going to sound, I don't want to sound defeatist, but here's the deal. Black people cannot solve racism for you because we didn't invent it. We don't have the levers of economic and social and political power that were used to enable this system. So we can't turn it off. If I knew where the switch was, I would turn it off today. But we can't do that. We need to work together to do that. We need you to do that. When you are in rooms where there are conversations that are taking place, and sometimes they're harsh conversations, people are saying, those so-and-so people that, hey, wait, we're all God's children. So like, that's not an acceptable term of conversation in my environment. Or you're trying to solve things for people. If there's nobody who has that problem in your room, you got a problem. You want to talk about solving things for homeless people? You need some homeless people in the room. You want to talk about solving things for people who are mentally ill? You need some mentally ill people in the room. Otherwise, what we're doing is projecting our ideas of what would make you feel better onto your situation without actually knowing anything about it. Are you homeless because you have a substance use problem? Are you homeless because you work 2 part-time jobs and that's still not enough to pay the rent? So you're living in your car and then your car broke down and so now you can't get it fixed? And so I'm at the shelter because I need to feed the kids. Unless we understand how people got there, we can't solve that. So I'm going to stop talking now because I could talk for another hour. I'm a preacher. And my family's from the South. And so, you don't get to the good part till about 45 minutes into the sermon in the South. But I want to hear some of your questions, and then I'm going to bounce. I'll put up some resources behind me so we can take a look at some of those things. Just want to make a shout out to my Uncle George. People say, sometimes when we talk about Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Well, Black lives matter, but blue lives matter to Black people as well. So my Uncle George killed in the line of duty. Okay. I dare anyone who has an All Lives Matter sign to go to the funeral of a New York City cop killed in the line of duty and hold that sign up. I dare you. If you're in this room, I will give you $500 if you don't get your ass kicked. That's how offensive that is. And they know that. They would never do that at a cop funeral. You wouldn't stand outside the cancer ward at Dana-Farber where people have their pink t-shirts on and say, I'm sorry that you have breast cancer, lung cancer, whatever cancer you have, but all lives matter. No one would ever do that. So we need to be aware of what's happening and the signals that are being sent that remind people, even back then in Jesus's time, that you're marginalized and we're not going to care about you because we think caring about you is not caring about us and we're not committed to doing that. As if you can only care about one thing. So with that, I'll take the questions. Yes.
A comment that you made earlier was how when you were a hospital chaplain, you were instructed on the difference between helping someone process their experience and using them to process your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
How can you differentiate that?
For me, it's there are 2 pieces to that. One is you got to do some reading, do some journaling, pay attention to what you are feeling in those moments. And if you're new at it, you're not going to know all the time that it's your feelings versus your feelings about somebody else. We have some signals in social settings about that. You shouldn't feel that way. He didn't mean you any harm. No, they really like gay people. He was just really upset. Okay. Somebody who's telling you that is processing their own feelings. They're not trying to help you with anything. By the same token, if you're doing that to somebody, okay, that's a good signal that you're trying to get yourself back to a space of comfort. Okay. And so that can be one signal, is when you find yourself running for comfort in the presence of someone else's suffering. Okay. Then that's, and it's not that it's wrong, it's human. So let's not make it wrong. Let's make it human. Okay. And then say, okay, how do I pay attention to that? So that when I'm having this conversation with Martha, I'm not really trying to get Martha to stop crying about her friend who's passed away so that I can feel better, because being in the presence of Martha when she's crying makes me really uncomfortable. How can I instead just hold Martha's hand and say, I don't know what to say. I don't even know what to feel in this moment, but I want you to know you're not alone. I want you to know that I am here with you, and there are lots of people who will be here with you. I don't have answers, but I do have love. Next question. Over there, and then we'll come here.
I think part of the story I'd like to hear from you, Reverend Chisolm, is you're an engineer, MBA, done a lot of different things. What convinced you to take the route to be a priest?
How much time you got? Here's the quick and dirty. I have wanted to preach since I was 12. I can tell you the moment, I can tell you the place, I can tell you the emotional experience that I was having. I then ran from that. I ran from it so much that friends, family, my wife gave me a new nickname. Now, sometimes God gives you a name and it means your future is changing. That's not what they were up to. They just decided they would call me Jonah. So the bottom line was I knew it was time to make the move, and I started thinking about it seriously. Because when I graduated from business school, a professor of mine said, what are you going to do now that you have this high-powered degree? I'm a University of Chicago MBA. You can go, there are certain schools that you can go anywhere in the world and you drop your credentials on the desk and they pull out a chair for you. Okay. There are a lot of good schools, but there are only a few where people will just like, oh, okay, have a seat. I told the professor I was thinking about going to seminary. And he kind of like, he had like a little glitch, you know, like C-3PO, you know. And then he said, why would you do that? And I said, well, I want to do something where I feel like I can help people. And then he said to me something that was life-changing, because he said to me, do you mind if I reframe that for you? And I said, okay. And we'd had conversations, so I knew he was a good self-described Polish Catholic guy from the south side of Chicago. He's a man of deep Catholic faith. He said, do you mind if I reframe that for you? I said, okay. He said, most people in America work because they have to, not because they want to. So if you can take what you've learned here and make the business successful so that it has a right to exist, because it can't employ anybody if it doesn't exist. If you make the business successful so that it has a right to exist, and take the values that you have and make what is a necessary experience for most Americans as compassionate and humane as possible, you will do more for them on a daily basis than you can ever do for them if you only see them once a week for an hour. And so I stayed in industry for another 15 years, almost 20 years. My 25th reunion, business school reunion, is this year. And as much as I tried to do that, I mean, that's how I ended up visiting that guy in Littleton in the hospital. You know, how do we make this experience as humane and compassionate as possible? I was the first plant manager that went to funerals regularly. And it didn't have to be a funeral of an employee. It could be a funeral of an employee family member. And we established that on the management team that that's what we're going to do. Somebody dies, somebody gets hurt, somebody from management is going to show up. Okay? Make it as humane and compassionate as possible, given that it is a necessary experience for people. But that can only take you so far. And one day I realized, you know, as B.B. King said, the thrill is gone. And working in manufacturing was just not my joy anymore. And so I had to turn and face into this call. And so I worked on it for the last 6 years in school. I quit my job last year, a year ago, this past December of 22. Spent 6 months at DHMC as a chaplain intern. Finished my classes, got ordained. Because this is what I'm supposed to do now. Maybe this is what I was supposed to do for a long time, but the only thing I can say is it smells really funky inside the whale. And so at some point I just had to get out. We had a question over here.
Could you comment on how your experience as a Black man is different when you're wearing a collar versus when you're not wearing a collar?
It depends on where you are, okay? Because there are people who have been traumatized by the church. Okay, and so there's a small group of people out there from whom I will receive a negative reaction when they see me with a collar. And I realize for some of them, they're responding to the collar. They're not responding to me. And I honor that. Okay. I can't make up anybody's internal experience, so I just try to honor it. There are people who will defer to me when they see me in a collar. Again, they're responding to the collar. They're not responding to me. And I'm appreciative of that. You know, part of the deal is, and this is probably a conversation that you want to have with Reverend Kathy about her call at some point, because I'm going to put you on the spot here for a future talk. And this collar is as much for us as it is for you. Okay, this collar every day, and unfortunately my collar is sitting on my desk at home. But the collar is a reminder of who we are supposed to be as we lead God's people. Okay. Now, there are some people who will see this collar and they will respond to it as a mark of safety. Okay. So my wife Allison can tell you, and this is something they tell us as new priests, don't wear your collar outside of the building unless you are willing to be stopped, because I have been stopped in parking lots. I've been stopped in supermarkets. You make eye contact with someone and say, how are you? They see this collar, they're like, well, I'm okay, but really, since it's you, what they mean is since you have a collar on. And then they tell me this story. And that really is then a decision that I have to make. Am I available emotionally to be engaged with someone else's story at this point in time? And I had the experience once, and this is near Walpole, in a store near Walpole. I walked in, it's after Sunday. It was a Sunday that Allison wasn't with me. Or no, it might have been a Wednesday when I was working down at the church. I go into a store. I'm talking to this lady. I'm exchanging some money for things at the counter, because that's what you do. And I'm like, oh, you know, so are you from here? And she's like, yeah, I grew up here. You know, she said, are you new here? Yeah, I'm new here. I said, what do you do? And I thought I was getting punked. You know, I'm a Black man. I'm trying to count the number of times I've seen another adult black male in Walpole, but I'm a black man and I got a collar on, which is like double visibility. And she's like, what do you do? And so I'm looking for the MTV truck and the camera and all of this stuff. I think I'm going to win some prizes, you know. But the truth for her is we live in a state with the second lowest worshiping, self-identified worshiping population in the country. We have people who are going to evangelical churches where pastors don't wear collars. And so her experience might actually be that she sees me dressed from head to toe in black with a white collar on, and she doesn't really know what that means. Okay, so this is a time to understand, because we talked about this earlier, but it's an opportunity to understand, when am I processing my own anger? Because I think I'm being punked. I think I'm being screwed with. What do you mean you don't know it? Well, I grew up in New York City. There are lots of Catholics in New York City. So there are priests who wear their collars 7 days a week. So someone in New York City who sees someone dressed from head to toe in black with a collar on, got it. We lived in Chicago. We worshiped a 10-minute walk from Holy Name Cathedral, which is the seat of the Bishop of Chicago, the Catholic Bishop of Chicago. There are over 1 million people in Chicago who self-identified as Catholic, which is, it's funny to think that's like 2/3 of the population of this state, or almost. But when you're in Chicago and you walk down the street with a collar, dressed in black from head to toe in a collar, people know you're a priest. So this is part of my learning experience, is like, I know how I feel about priests. Why don't you feel that way about me? Why don't you feel the way about me that I feel about people when I see priests? But I'm processing my own experience.
Can I add something here?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a wife, and I just have an observation to what you said, which is Fred has always dressed in a way to signal to white community. So I will travel in the world's ugliest sweat outfit with, basically my pajamas. And I still expect people to understand that I'm a paying customer and that I'm expecting. Fred is always dressed in the khakis with the whole belt, with the this. He wears sports coats a lot. Part of it is Fred's personality. Like, we laugh about it. Fred's the tucked partner. I'm the untucked partner. But also, I learned very early on that also Fred was signaling he was blending in essence, and also trying to diminish the level of concern with people and how people would encounter him, right? So Fred doesn't walk around with the baseball cap turned around on the back of his head, that kind of stuff. So I had already seen Fred's behavior adapt to the idea that most people in the United States, when they encounter a black man who they do not know, will experience some sort of level of concern. They will experience, we have been trained to believe that this person may be dangerous, right? And so Fred has already long ago made some choices about how he walks through the world. And so the priest collar was a bonus like detail, and as you see, he likes the bonus detail. Like it's an exciting time for him because he's coming into his own. He's realizing his Jonah-ness. But so I haven't noticed as much of a difference, but I will say there's also the weird difference about the wife, because half of them do think he's a Catholic priest, so why is he with me, right? More complicated later, right? Like, I don't want to look like the nun that just escaped.
We have a question over there, and then we got one there, and then we got one here.
Mine is not a question so much, but more of a confirmation. I related to the part where you spoke about,
I'm just standing up so I can see.
I related to the part where you spoke about where you were, gained acceptance from the guy that you trained, that, you learned under. Part of the shooting. I experienced that same type of, situation, just in a different way.
Mhm.
This was in prison. And in there's a very heavy racial separation in the air.
Mhm.
Okay. But I gained huge acceptance due to my God gift, which is my artwork.
Mhm.
And that wasn't any doing of mine. Only a God gift has that kind of power. And there, like I said, heavy racial separation. But the especially the Hispanics, huge separation from the blacks. But Hispanics love art, and Gilman caught wind of my work, and in fact, their leader, their shot caller of the Mexican car, as they call it, caught wind of my work and arranged to speak to me. And so he wanted a family portrait done. So they put, as a result of it, they put all that aside, their prior beliefs and the restrictions, which proved to me that that's nonsense anyway. And during the process of me doing the family portrait for him, I got to know him, he got to know me, and we became very good friends. And that's something that I've become friends with people that normally wouldn't have had anything to do with me because of the color of my skin. But as a result of my God gift, we became very good friends.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that to confirm what you did.
Amen. Thank you.
Can we see that picture that you have there on your slide?
Yeah, if you would hold that up for us, because I noticed that when I walked by you earlier. Yeah. And he's drawing that, ladies and gentlemen, he's drawing that freehand.
From my phone, I have a better. I do a lot of celebrities. I enjoy doing celebrity portraits. Here's a couple of mine.
Wow.
That's my God gift. The only God gift have that kind of power. It has nothing to do with me. But, you know, it just proves to me that all that racial separation and their rules and stuff is nonsense.
Amen. We have a question somewhere over here. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, first is a comment and then a question. The comment is, I'm envious of your ability when you talk about being in a conversation with someone who's trying to, pardon the pun, whitewash something, and you turn it around, become very specific. Gee, we're doing this because of blah, 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 blah. And you turn it around and say, okay, what can we do specifically to do X, Y, Z? I say envious because I find myself in conversation where someone's going through all this problem, and I don't know how to interrupt it and change the conversation into something more meaningful or focused. I wish we had seminars here to help us learn how to do that.
Right.
So
That's
Okay.
my question is, you're talking about the whitewashing of conversations to avoid things. My question is, in the media now, we have all this talk about quote unquote reparations. I'm trying to get my head around it to understand, what does it mean? How is it meaningful? Or is it just another way of deflecting what the real issue is and calling it something grandiose? So what is reparations in the context of race? What do you think of it? Is it meaningless or is it meaningful? And how, if it is meaningful, how do we turn it from some vacuous or ethereal thing into something concrete? Because taking billions of dollars and giving them to every person who has been unjustly trampled upon probably isn't a realistic solution. Or is it? And I am just not aware.
And I have a couple of things to say. One, I want to respond to your comment, and then I'll respond to your question. When you're in those conversations, it feels like, you guys are just circling in the sky because you don't want to land on something. But it's important to ask, what is our desired outcome? To say, okay, I think we've had this conversation more than once, so I want to get clear about what is the desired outcome. And then nobody speaks until you can articulate that. And you may have to brainstorm, you may have to arm wrestle, you may have to do a bunch of things because, and this is where you can find out whether people are trying to get to solutions or they're just processing their feelings. Because for some of us, the desired outcome, and for those of you who've been in romantic relationships will know sometimes you're in the middle of the argument and what you really want to do is get out of this argument. You hope you get the solution, but your desired outcome is to get out of this argument. Okay. I can see on the faces of some of you that you know exactly what this means. Okay, so with that, I think is your first move. Define the outcome. Thank you. Or hello, depending on when you're coming from. With regard to reparations, I think you need to talk to a bunch of different people because it's going to mean different things to different people. Okay. And that is, which brings up an important point, is when you start talking to people about race, talk to more than one person about race. Because we're going to have different feelings about that. We're going to want different things from it. I am the direct descendant of a slave, so my feelings about reparations might be very different from someone who was Bahamian or Nigerian and has never actually been a slave, but experiences treatment that has nothing to do with their time in America. It has everything to do with the color of their skin. So now with regard to reparations specifically, I think it's a way that we're looking to redress the emotional and economic harm that has been done to people of color in this country. I would invite for you, and we won't go into it today, but I invite you to research that topic. I invite for you to look up the Tulsa Race Massacre. Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, why do I bring that up? It was called Black Wall Street in its day. And then a bunch of people said, we can't have it. And then a presidential candidate says, I'm going to hold a rally near the site of, I'm going to hold the rally in Tulsa near where the race massacre happened. Okay, so even as we try to work through these things, there is those signals the environment is sending to us that we're not going to acknowledge that that wasn't okay. In fact, we're going to have a rally there, which is maybe signaling to some of my supporters that if you elect me, we'll be back in charge. And we won't have these people doing this stuff. These black people, these Mexican people, these gay people, these whoever your unfavorite people is, if you elect me, then you're not going to have to worry about it. So talk to folks. Learn the history. Because otherwise, it becomes an argument about what we do in the moment, and what you don't realize is you just jumped onto a train that's been headed in this direction for 100 years. You think you're standing still. You don't know where you're going because you're right here. We can't feel the earth move, but it's moving. And conversations sometimes are the same way, have their own momentum. And there was a question over here.
Yeah, I just have one. I'm curious if you could talk about, I know you said you wanted to come to Chicago. You were hired as an independent engineer. Could you just talk about your experience? Did people make comments or talk behind your back about it? That, oh, we only got Jones Black, or you only got to University of Chicago, like special treatment.
Yeah, people.
They say it to your face, or you kind of hear about it like.
Well, both. When I worked on a flight test team at Naval Air Station, I had people who wouldn't talk to me until they found out I could fix the radar. Once I became useful, I became acceptable. Okay.
became a person.
which,
Suddenly.
no, I didn't become a person. I became someone who was useful to them. You know, eventually, I became a person.
You became a skill.
But my utility co-signed my humanity. And so that's something that we need to understand that happens. You know, we accord people a certain amount of status based on their utility, based on how they're dressed, based on any of these. And that's okay. I learned something from my grandfather that I want to share with you, and then I think I'll wind down, because I think I've been yapping long enough. I'll stick around and take individual questions. But I flew into Charleston Airport. It was the first time ever for me on an airplane with my grandfather. We weren't going to take the train down to South Carolina anymore. We flew. We get off. We're in the airport. We go to the counter. And the guy looks at my then, I don't know, 1967, 68. So my grandfather was born in 1903. He's 64, 65 at that point. Got gray hair, got a gray mustache. 19-year-old Caucasian young man looks at my grandfather and says, "What can I do for you, boy?" And, you know, with all the righteousness and anger that you can muster when you grow up in Harlem in the South Bronx, and my grandfather just like to put his hand on my shoulder. And what he told me is he said, "If I spit on the ground and told you to pick it up, would you do that? So why would you try to pick up somebody's words that they spit out on the ground about you?" If people learn that that works, they will learn that they can distract you. That all they need to do to stop your mission is to upset you. We talked about that in the sermon today. About keeping our eyes on heavenly, about staying on mission, about staying focused, about what the real outcome is that we're driving after. We're driving after justice. We're driving after love. We're driving after community and how to create those things in the face of people who benefit from us not having them. But that's the real key for me. I hear those things. People say those things. Sometimes they bother me, but I'm not going to bend over and pick it up. That's why I didn't worry about the guys who were yelling at me, you know, "Negro, go home." And they didn't get out of the truck. You think that's cool? Get out of the truck. Bring it. Well, I probably shouldn't say that on tape now. I'll go to confession with Reverend Kathy right after. With Bishop Macy to stay. But it's important to understand when you're running from things or when you're staying on mission. If you're running from things, then you have some work to do. You need to understand, what is it about this that makes you feel like I need to back away from it? And it might be appropriate for you to back away from it at that time. Backing away from something isn't necessarily bad. You need to understand why. And then you need to understand, is this taking me off mission? And is that its intended outcome? And we all know that. You've been in relationships, you've had the arguments about the things that you are more comfortable arguing about because you really don't want to have the conversation that says, "I don't feel safe," or "I'm scared that you love someone else," or I've been disowned by my family because I married a person of a different race, gender, whatever it is. Those are hard conversations to have, so let's fight about where we park the car. Let's fight about how much money you spent last week on shoes, suits, streaming, whatever it is, because those are easier fights for us to have. Okay? Instead of having the heart fights. And they don't have to be fights, they can be conversations, but you need to engage yourself and then engage your person, engage your event, engage the thing that's in front of you. But never try to do that without first engaging yourself. Because your heart will tell you what fights are worth having. And sometimes there are fights you should just walk away from. So when somebody says, you only got a job because you're a black guy and you couldn't find any other black guys and you needed a black guy because they have all this affirmative action stuff going on, I'm like, this is something I really hate to do, but the reality is I got out of public school, I went to private school, I went to the Horace Mann School for Boys in New York. Many of you will know what that is. 70% of my graduating class went to Ivy League college. So when people talk crap like that to me, I'm like, let's lay them out.
Yeah.
Okay, where'd you go to high school? Where'd you go to college? Did you do any graduate work? Where'd you go? Never heard of it. How about this? You try not to go there with people because that's worldly stuff. And if you have those arguments, it's what we talked about in the sermon today. You know, we're trying to acquire our esteem from the things that we think the world will give us esteem for if we just exchange this. So I say that to say there are some fights you can have, and there are fights you can win that you shouldn't even bother with because they'll take you off mission. This ain't about Fred. This ain't about us. At least not for me. This is about God. And our call to love one another just as I love you. Okay. Now, some people are hard to love. And the reality is, if you read the text closely, it says, as I have loved you. It doesn't say that you have to like them. But what does it mean to love people that you don't like? It means we have to be deeply concerned for their welfare. Not just the people we like, but even the people we don't like. How do we care for them? And if there's somebody that you particularly don't like, pray for them. And maybe your prayer is, Lord, I hope somebody comes to help them because I can't. If you're looking for me, But I want to thank you for your time. As I said, I'll stick around. We went longer than we planned to go, but I've really enjoyed this time. We planned an hour. We've been about an hour and a half. But I really appreciate it. And I'm really touched to be invited to this community and be listening. Some of you know me and some of you don't. When I saw you this morning, I almost cried. Because Katie, I was in the school for ministry with Katie. And it sat down. This place is so much heart. And so thank you for inviting me to be part of it. Amen. No, I'm going to suck down some soup here.